people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Lots to get through this morning. 2 flights with 300 British nationals have made it out of Sudan, but still thousands are stranded. We'll be speaking to someone who made her own way and feels abandoned by the government.
And the top economist at the Bank of England says we've all got to get used to being poorer and not ask for pay rises. He's on almost £200,000 a year. All right for him.
Now, more Bobbies on the beat. The Home Secretary has just confirmed to GB News that the government has hit its police numbers target. We're going to be finding out how they did that and what it might mean for you.
And Toy Story, the first Barbie doll with Down syndrome is in the shops. A campaigner tells us how child's play can change attitudes.
Let us know your thoughts, particularly on the accusation that you've just got to be poor and put up with it. I think that's an amazing thing for him to say. GBViews at gbnews.uk is the email address. But first of all, here is your latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Hundreds of Britons have been evacuated from Sudan as the military is under pressure to bring people to safety before a 72-hour ceasefire ends. The first 2 planes carrying British nationals out of Sudan have landed in Cyprus, with the first charter flight back to London set to depart later today. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says that up to 300 people have been rescued so far from the country. The Prime Minister has pledged that many more would follow, as he warned of a critical 24 hours ahead. The Home Secretary has accused the European Court of Human Rights of undermining the government. That's after the controversial Rwanda plan was blocked last year. Parliament will today vote on whether to give the UK powers to ignore the Strasbourg Court's rulings. If the bill is successful, Ms Braverman said they would not put a limit to the number of migrants they could deport to Rwanda. MPs debating on the bill have been warned to bear in mind the UK's human rights commitments. The Prime Minister says the government is on the cusp of hitting the target of hiring 20,000 new police officers in England and Wales. Rishi Sunak said the goal was at the heart of his pledge when he took office to cut crime and make communities safer. The recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next 10 years. But he said that although progress is good, more work is needed. And health leaders have warned that patient safety is at risk ahead of the planned nurses' strike this weekend. NHS Confederation said that if there are no plans in place for covering striking staff, then there'll be no guarantee of safe care for patients. The walkout, subject to a legal challenge, marks a significant escalation in the ongoing dispute over pay. Strike action will begin at 8 o'clock on Sunday evening and will last for 48 hours. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. You're with GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, the second evacuation flight carrying British nationals from Sudan has landed in Cyprus. British troops are preparing to take over the running of a key airfield from Germany.
Taking advantage of a 72-hour ceasefire, the Prime Minister pledged many more flights would follow as the government looked to evacuate an estimated 4,000 British passport holders. Earlier on, GB News heard from American travel blogger Lakshmi Parthasari, who was in Sudan when the fighting broke out.
I had received no communication from the U.S. Embassy other than to shelter in place, but at that time, there wasn't really a way to shelter in place because there was no power, no water, and no money, and internet was blacking out, and the fighting had basically spilled into the residential street that I was living on because I was in Khartoum Central, and I'd been lucky for a while where it had remained quiet, but at that point, it was time to flee. And so I was able to hitchhike out of Khartoum, and with the help of Sudanese people, make it to Wad Madani.
Our Home Security Editor Mark White's here. Mark, government gets attacked either way, doesn't it? We think maybe 300 are out. I'm not sure it is 300 because the Home Secretary's told GB News between 200 to 300. Hello, can't we be a bit more specific?
Yeah, well, I was hearing about 230 or so had come out. And it might be difficult, actually, to persuade people to come out because we're hearing that many people have got family members over there, mothers, fathers and the like, who don't have British passports. They don't want to leave them behind. And so they've decided just to sort of stay put for the time being and try and, wait this out. And it's difficult. As you say, the British government is being criticised because you've got the likes of the Germans who had 700 of their nationals there, and they decided to evacuate them while the fighting was underway. Now, yes, that worked out for them, but what would have happened if, during the evacuation of these civilians, one of their vehicles was struck by gunfire, artillery or whatever? Then there would be big recriminations and inquiries on the German government. So
demand to resignations from foreign ministers, home secretaries and the like.
So perhaps it was the most responsible thing for the British government to do, to actually wait for a ceasefire. Of course, it's still very volatile there. There's still gunfire and artillery being heard from time to time. There are these checkpoints that are pretty intimidating, no doubt, as you try to work your way from whatever part of Khartoum you might be in to this airfield in the north. And maybe that's why some people are not heading to the airbase as well. But yeah, it's difficult. We're told that there are about 3,000 to 4,000 British British passport holders out in Sudan. Will all of them, at the end of the day, take these flights? I doubt it. But, you know, perhaps, you know, 1,000.
It's a bit like Ukraine, isn't it? Some people simply don't want to leave.
Yeah.
They'd rather risk potentially getting bombed in their homes in Kiev.
And presumably, like Ukraine, there must be some areas of Sudan, Mark, which are safer than others.
Yeah, for instance, those that can get out of Khartoum to the east and head to the port of Sudan, if they get to the port of Sudan, we're told that's a much more benign atmosphere there, and there are evacuations taking place there. They're trying to arrange evacuations from the international airport in the port of Sudan, and also there are ships, naval ships and civilian ships that are taking civilians out as well. The difficulty, though, is it's a 500-mile trek from Khartoum.
How long does that take?
It's a huge country, from Khartoum to the port of Sudan, and you just never know what you're going to encounter.
Yeah.
There's petrol shortages, there's all kinds of issues you have to factor in. So maybe the best solution is to stay put, but that's not guaranteed as well. You know, if the situation really deteriorates, you run out of food and water, electricity, you're cut off from communications, that can be just as risky. There's no good solution, really.
Is the internet back restored now? Because that was an issue in the beginning. Communications were impossible.
Partially, it is coming and going. And, of course, some of the criticism of the likes of the British government is that they haven't been using all of the tools available to them in this digital age to reach out to people in the way that, for instance, the French did over WhatsApp and alike. That, of course, in the fullness of time, will be reviewed, as these incidents often are. We know that there were many shortcomings with the evacuation in Afghanistan. I'm sure, like every emergency that the government has to deal with, some of it they just have to make up and respond to as they go along. They don't always get it right, but I think the intention is always right.
Yeah. We're going to be talking, actually, I think, in just a moment to one lady who is trying to get out of Sudan to find out how difficult that is for her. But joining us on the last few minutes, of course, Olivia, we're going to speak to Olivia Otley now, because the last few minutes, the latest police recruitment data has been published. The government has met its 20,000 officer target. The Home Secretary is to address this again later this morning in a speech at the Public Safety Foundation. But joining us now, as I say, is Olivia. Good morning, Olivia. This is very much a win for the Conservatives. At least that's how they're telling us it is.
Well, yes, it was expected. The Home Secretary said that she was going to make a speech today confirming whether or not the government had reached its target, so we all assumed that the government had reached its target. It has recruited 20,950 police officers in the last few years, as promised by Boris Johnson. Now, on the face of it, this is very good news, but there are a few little caveats, one of which is that in the few months between December and March, the government hadn't yet met its target. It was only on 16,700 police officers, which means that in the space of just a couple of months, the government recruited over 3,000 police officers. Now, doing it so quickly and at such a big scale comes with problems of its own. The Sunday Telegraph, for example, was reporting that there are some police forces which are bringing back police officers who failed their tests in order to try and meet those recruitment targets. Now, obviously, then you get into issues whether are these people being vetted properly. We know that there have been quite a few rogue police officers in the Met in particular, and if failed recruits are coming back again, that probably isn't particularly good news. Another issue is that a lot of these police officers are being recruited from the ranks of community support officers, which means that it's possible that there will be gaps left elsewhere. There's another problem, of course. They might not be that good at their jobs. That's an issue which Tim Loughton has been, a Conservative MP, has been pushing a lot with the policing minister. So yes, on the face of it, it is very good news, but it's been extremely expensive, £3.6 billion spent on this in the last year alone. And it isn't quite clear how good the results are going to be. But certainly this morning, Suella Braverman is going to paint it as a big win for the Conservatives.
Olivia, people will be delighted there are all these extra police officers, but we should not forget the reason they've had to recruit these 21,000 police officers is because Theresa May's Home Secretary axed 20,000 police officers because she didn't think they were needed, and she did it to save money. So it's a Pyrrhic victory.
Well, absolutely. That is the other point that the Labour front bench is making repeatedly. Essentially, these 21,000 police officers who've just been recruited almost exactly match the 21,000 police officers who were let go under Theresa May's government. And of course, with all of these other issues in the system, police officers essentially being borrowed from one place and taken to another, it could very much be argued that this is just a Pyrrhic victory for the Conservatives. And I think that problem of these rogue police officers, people who didn't get through the vetting process for whatever reason or failed their test, being brought back is certainly enough to set alarm bells ringing, really, because we know about these very rogue police officers, Wayne Couzens among them, for example. And if there's any danger of police officers like that slipping through the net again, simply because this recruitment drive has been ranked up so quickly and at such a massive scale, then I think the public are going to have a few problems with this.
Certainly are.
Thank you, Olivia.
She was a pretty appalling Home Secretary in hindsight, wasn't she, Theresa May?
She was very unpopular at the time, wasn't she?
Yeah, and a Tory government losing 20,000 police officers. She went to the Police Federation and said, "You're crying wolf, you don't need all these police officers." We do. Look at how crime is spiralling out of control and detection.
Yeah, absolutely. OK, let's return to the Sudan evacuations for 1 minute. One British national who just made it out of Sudan, in fact, is Roseanne Ahmed. Good morning, Roseanne. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Where are you? What's your experience been in the last few days?
I'm not sure. Roseanne, can you hear us? It's Andrew and Bev, GB News. Roseanne Ahmed, who's got out of Sudan. Can you hear us, Roseanne? No? We will get to her. But look, we've got 230 people out so far. I think Mark White was right, though. We shouldn't be too critical of the government because a lot of people probably don't want to leave. They're
Absolutely.
scared.
They don't want to leave. I'd be interested as well. We'll probably have Mark back, I'm sure, as the morning goes on. But I'm interested to know how many Americans are having to come out. I know we have a big contingent of British people there because of the oil and gas industry that we were talking about yesterday, and the fact that we have been in that area of the world for many decades, and people have made their lives there, they've made their homes there, they've got children at school there. The disruption for those people is extraordinary. So we have a responsibility to look after our British citizens.
Yeah, and the Foreign Office advice until a couple of days ago was stay at home.
Yeah.
Don't go out. As Mark said, there is a ceasefire. It's day 2 of the ceasefire, but you can hear gunfire and cannon fire. I think we've got Roseanne Ahmed back. Roseanne, can you hear us? Good morning.
Oh, now she can hear us and we can't hear her.
Roseanne, can you hear us?
Oh, there we go.
Lovely.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can, Roseanne. Tell us about how you escaped and where you are.
I am now on the Egyptian border. I'm in Aswan. And we escaped independently. The Sudanese communities came together, mobilized and organized ourselves to get ourselves to the border and escape, essentially. As a British national of Sudanese origin, I felt I had no choice but to take this route, which I feel in many ways was a blessing in disguise because the people have really, it is the people that have kept me together. Unfortunately, there was no other means of getting out, and I'm very grateful that I have managed to reach safety, but my heart is very much with the people of Sudan and those that haven't been able to find a way, because it isn't easy, it isn't safe. It's a massive, massive risk to go out on the streets and drive and attempt to move in the midst of war. And it's also not cheap, it's very expensive. So it was a harrowing journey, but I'm here now, and I hope to get back to the UK very soon.
Do you live in the UK, Roseanne, or were you over there visiting friends, family, or do you spend consistent amounts of time in Sudan?
Well, no, I am based between the UK and Dubai. My work allows for me to travel the globe, really. So I'm never really in one place. Sudan, I don't visit too often, but I do have family here. And I had come to attend the funeral of my cousin who had passed away very suddenly, actually. So I was only due to be here for 4 days. The day before my travel was when the war kicked off.
How did you manage to get out? You obviously were given help, and it obviously cost money. Did people drive you? Did you drive yourself?
Well, no, I didn't drive myself. There are buses. What has come to be as a means of independent evacuation is Sudanese communities from varying cities that are under attack right now are mobilizing and organizing themselves in buses and making their way to Egypt. Other families are going to safer cities such as Midday, although the route is what is so terrifying, because, you know, imagine being in a bus and driving past tankers and, you know, the risk of gunfire or shelling coming your way. So it is essentially the work of the community, the resilience of the community that have come together and are making their way through. I mean, cash is very important. So those of us who have access to cash are able to pay for the provisions that are required along the way. And we did it on our own. That's really how we did it. We organized and made our way by ourselves.
What sort of sums are you talking about, Roseanne, in terms of getting yourself safely? And who are you actually paying? Are people profiteering from you getting out freely?
I wouldn't say profiteering, but there are means. You know, there's petrol that needs to be paid for. There's bus drivers. There's fees that need to be paid, you know, on crossing the border. There's for many, there are visas. You know, there's expenses. So I won't say that anyone is really profiteering, but prices are higher for certain things. You know, food is hard to come by at the moment. Water is hard to come by at the moment. So when we do come across it, then yes, prices are a little higher, but I wouldn't say they're extortionate.
Okay. Can we ask what it cost you to escape?
I would say in total around $3,000.
Wow.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. And if you're a family of 5 people, you're looking at a huge amount of money to escape. Roseanne, was there any reason why you didn't go to the airport to get on one of the British flights?
The airport is on fire. It's been destroyed from what I understand. But for the first 10 days of me being in Sudan, we had not heard anything as British citizens by way of an evacuation plan. My mother, who called incessantly, you know, every day, hour, many times a day, and I myself, I actually have friends who are staff there. They were just unable to update with anything solid. And I don't know if that was due to logistics or just how dangerous Sudan was or what. But 10 days in, I hadn't heard of any form of evacuation. And at that point, I was so scared that I had to find a way to go.
Do you feel let down? Do you feel let down, Roseanne, by the government?
I think I need to know more. I need to understand, you know, why it had taken so long. So I don't think disappointment is the word. I think real wonderment is the word. You know, if there is difficulty in getting us out as British citizens, then let us know why. You know, a lot of us felt like we didn't have a choice. We just had to do what we could to get out. My mother needs me, you know, and I had to find a way. So I have no words, to be honest. And I really hope that evacuations have started now. I haven't watched the news because I've been traveling with no internet access for 3 days. It's a 3-day journey on average. So I hope that they have begun and that more of us are being evacuated safely.
Roseanne, how optimistic are you that the conflict will be brought to a swift conclusion?
That's a really good question. Sudan is so complicated politically, and this what confuses me is that this brawl between these two factions taking place, even I, as an observer, as an analyst, but not essentially part of any particular institution, even I knew that this was going to happen. That this clash was going to happen. So the lack of readiness was a real shock to me, and I just don't know if it will come to an end swiftly because of how complicated things are by way of a new government and the transitional process that has already taken so long.
OK.
All right, Roseanne, well, good luck getting back. I bet your mum will be looking forward to seeing you, and I'm sure you're looking forward to seeing your mum. Roseanne,
thank you.
Ahmed, thanks for joining us, and great news that she's got out.
Yeah.
People sometimes have to use their own devices. But at least Roseanne can be reassured that they are now getting people out via the airport.
Yeah. OK, the Immigration Minister has accused opponents of the illegal migration bill of virtue signalling as the government seeks to push the legislation into law.
It's the Stop the Boats bill. It's back in Parliament today. It's the final stages. There will be a big Labour vote against it because there is suggestions that the policy could breach the law of the European courts.
That's right. The Equality and Human Rights Commission have also pushed back against the government, claiming that the bill fails to protect basic human rights.
Our GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey joins us now. Darren, Darren, morning. This is a fight Rishi Sunak wants, doesn't he? He wants to fight with all these, dare I say it, bleeding heart liberals who want to stop the Boats legislation.
Yeah, I think it's a fight the government are prepared to have, Andrew, but it is also one they're going to have to navigate today. That is because there are two amendments, effectively, to this bill being put forward by Conservative MPs. First of all, you've got one section, the kind of slightly more liberal One Nation Conservatives, Tim Loughton, Theresa May, who are suggesting that the government need to look at this legislation again so it protects children, unaccompanied children who arrive in the UK, or indeed children who come with refugees or migrants should not be held in detention. Now, this is something I think the government will in the end concede. And then on the other side, you've actually got those slightly further to the right, if you like, though in the end Suella Braverman's got her name down to this amendment, which is again going to be backed by the government, talking about how this bill, government legislation, should be allowed to ignore some of the interim rulings of the European Court of Human Rights. And at the moment, it is those rulings of the EHCR, which, by the way, is not a European court, it's got nothing to do with the EU in that sense, but they have temporarily blocked those flights to Rwanda. So this is to toughen up current legislation, if you like, and also, and this is where the criticism comes in, it will effectively criminalise people who arrive here in the UK illegally. Now, the government's faced an awful lot of flack on this, but Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has been on GB News this morning defending her and the government's position.
Work with the UNHCR around the world, whereby people in humanitarian disasters or conflict situations who want to seek asylum in the UK can apply via the UNHCR out in the region. And we've resettled about 50,000 people through those non-specific country routes in recent years. So whether it's the 500,000 people that we've welcomed to the United Kingdom from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, from Syria, or from Hong Kong, or whether it's the many thousands of people that we've resettled through other routes outside of those countries, we have a very good track record of supporting some of the most vulnerable people in the world.
Now, as I say, lots of the opposition parties, Andrew, effectively call this policy immoral. The government clearly disagrees with that. But what the Labour Party are calling for is what Suella Braverman was just talking about there, which are more legal routes on top of the from Ukraine, Afghanistan and from Hong Kong. They reckon it could help sort out this problem as well as clearing some of the backlog. Though the government says that they want to stop the boats, they think that this is going to be effective action. They think it's going to act fundamentally as a deterrent. We're going to expect a vote around 7 p.m. tonight. The big question is, if it gets through the Commons, which it almost certainly will it get held up in the Lords? I think that's likely. Then what will the government do? That'll be the big question for the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Darren.
And they'll relish, and the Prime Minister will relish a fight with the House of Lords too. Unelected, all those former judges, all those lawyers. It's what he wants.
Get in touch with us this morning, won't you? GBviews at gbnews.uk on all of our stories. We're only half an hour in. We've got tons more to get through this morning. We're going to have Joanna Williams and Mike Parry in the studio as well between now and midday. Of course, it's PMQs today, and we're going to be finishing just a little early for that. We're going to also have more on the evacuations from Sudan. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it? With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. Yeah, we're here. It is To The Point on GB News. It's a very busy sort of morning. We're going to be talking about Suella Braverman and what she was
Home
saying.
Secretary, police numbers. They've got 21,000 new police officers. Is it as good as it looks on the box? The evacuations from
Yeah.
Sudan?
Yeah, the flights. 300 British nationals apparently have made it out, but thousands are stranded. We've spoken to one just now who told us how she felt abandoned by the government.
And we're also going to talk about the Bank of England economist who says just get used to being poor, don't expect a pay rise. How much do you think he earns? Almost £200,000 a year. Is he in touch? I don't think so.
And more bobbies on the beat, or at least the same number that we used to have. The Home Secretary has confirmed to GB News this morning the government has hit its police numbers target to get them back to what they were originally.
And Barbie doll, the first one with Down syndrome, is in the shops. It's all about... We're talking to a campaigner who tells us child's play can change attitudes. Very important story.
I like her dress. Let us know what you think on those stories this morning. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first of all, here are your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Hundreds of British nationals have been evacuated from Sudan, with more expected to leave the country today. The first 2 planes landed at Larnaca Airport in Cyprus, and the first charter flight to London is expected to leave later on today. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says up to 300 people had been brought out so far. It's estimated around 4,000 Britons were stuck in Sudan. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours ahead as the military races to rescue people before the ceasefire comes to an end. There's been criticism over the UK's response to rescue efforts, which Ms Braverman has defended.
We are in a very different situation to many other countries. For unique and historic reasons, we have a larger cohort of British nationals in Sudan than many other countries, and that puts us in a very different position. We have focused on supporting our diplomats because in some cases they have been in the crossfire and they've been really at significant risk to life and limb.
Meanwhile, the Home Secretary has accused the European Court of Human Rights of undermining the government after the controversial Rwanda plan was blocked last year. Parliament will today vote on whether to give the UK powers to ignore the Strasbourg Court's rulings. If the government's illegal migration bill is successful, Ms Braverman said they would not put a limit to the number of migrants they could deport to Rwanda. MPs debating on the bill have been warned to bear in mind the UK's human rights commitments. The government has met its target of police recruitment numbers as figures show nearly 21,000 new officers in England and Wales since 2019. Rishi Sunak said the goal was at the heart of his pledge when he took office to cut crime and make communities safer. The recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next 10 years. But Mr Sunak said that although progress is good, more work is needed. Health leaders have warned that patient safety is at risk ahead of the planned nurses' strike this weekend. NHS Confederation said that if there are no plans in place for covering striking staff, then there'll be no guarantee of safe care for patients. The walkout, subject to a legal challenge, marks a significant escalation in the ongoing dispute over pay. Strike action will begin tomorrow on Sunday at 8 p.m. and will last for 48 hours. Prince Harry's phone hacking claim against News Group newspapers continues today at the High Court. The Duke of Sussex believes his private information was unlawfully accessed. During day one of his legal battle, Harry made allegations that his brother Prince William settled a claim with the same newspaper company in 2020 over hacking claims. Kensington Palace has declined to comment. The hearing is expected to finish tomorrow. The Foreign Secretary has said that China should not be classed as a threat to the UK. James Cleverly argued that its scale and complexity cannot be reduced to one-word descriptions. He added that failing to engage with China would be a sign of weakness and that the UK must engage directly with the country in order to promote stability.
Dealing with China, I can assure you, is not a job for the faint-hearted. They represent a ruthless authoritarian tradition utterly at odds with our own. But we have an obligation to future generations to engage, because otherwise we would be failing in our duty to sustain and shape the international order.
Almost 3 million emergency parcels were handed out at food banks in the last year. That's a record 37% increase compared to the year before. Figures from the Trussell Trust charity show the number is more than double the amount distributed in the same period 5 years ago. The number of parcels provided for children has also reached 1 million for the very first time. The charity warns that demand for parcels is higher than the number of donations being received. And the coronation countdown has begun with just 10 days to go. Final preparations are now underway ahead of the big day. Westminster Abbey is now shut to visitors and a replica of the coronation stage has been built in the Buckingham Palace ballroom to allow King Charles and the Queen Consort to privately practice. Early morning rehearsals of the military parade have been spotted through the empty streets of London ahead of the big day. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
We've got some breaking news. So the first flight bringing evacuees out of Cyprus, they came from Sudan, is on its way to Britain now. We've joined in the studio with Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. Progress?
Yes, it's just left the international airport in Larnaca. The Akrotiri Royal Air Force Base is being used effectively for the military transport aircraft to base and resupply and then head out to Sudan. But they're taking them back to that international airport in Larnaca, where they're being housed in hotels and sort of processed and looked after before being put on flights to the UK. And the first of those flights now en route to London. 3 British transport aircraft arrived in Larnaca, one yesterday, one overnight and one this morning. We're told about 230, 240 people so far. The difficulty, I think, is that it's still very volatile around Khartoum. There are people that haven't yet been able to make it to that airbase north of Khartoum. And also there are people that are just deciding they're going to hunker down and stay with loved ones who don't have British passports and wouldn't be eligible to get into the UK.
Roseanne Ahmed, who we talked to, who got out on a bus, she made her own way. Did it cost her $3,000 over 3 days? She said she'd heard that the airport in Sudan was in flames. I don't think that's probably accurate, is it?
The international airport in Khartoum was in flames.
Okay.
There was heavy shelling around the airport. I think 1 or 2 of the aircraft on the ground there were struck as well. So there is video doing the rounds that shows quite heavy smoke and flames coming from that airport, but that was 2 or 3 days ago. This is a different air base north in the northern suburbs of Khartoum. Right. It's a military base. It's been secured by Sudanese military, but also in conjunction with German forces. British forces, about 120 or so personnel flew out there yesterday, and they'll be taking over helping to secure that airbase to allow the safe evacuation of these British and other Western nationals.
Let's have a listen, Mark, to American travel blogger Lakshmi Parthasafi. She was in Khartoum when the fighting broke out, and here's what she had to say this morning.
I received no communication from the U.S. Embassy other than to shelter in place, but at that time, there wasn't really a way to shelter in place because there was no power, no water, and no money, and internet was blacking out, and the fighting had basically spilled into the residential street that I was living on because I was in Khartoum Central, and I'd been lucky for a while where it had remained quiet, but at that point, it was time to flee. And so I was able to hitchhike out of Khartoum, and with the help of Sudanese people, make it to Wad Madani.
The tales which are coming out are of individual resourcefulness a lot, aren't they? Having to just work out how to put one foot in front of the other and get to a place of safety. Sudan has only had 12 years of peace in the last 68 years, Mark. What is this conflict specifically about? Just explain to people who might be thinking, well, what's going on in the country?
Yeah, I mean, we remember, of course, the genocide in Darfur. It is a country that has a great deal of instability over the years. And what we had, though, in 2021 was a military coup that ousted the sitting president, controversial chap and an autocrat who was subsequently jailed, and I think may well be presence unknown in terms of the fact that
here.
Well, a number of the prisons have been emptied by rebel forces at the moment, so there's some suggestion that he may have disappeared.
Wow. Is that Al-Bashir?
Yeah, but may well be just in the confusion. You know, he is still about, but that will become known in the sort of hours and days ahead. But basically, when we had this military coup, then a top general took over, and there was a subordinate general who was looking after special forces. And then there was a row and a falling out over how the special forces were going to be integrated into the military proper, how that would go ahead. And that's it. It's two warring factions within the Sudanese military going at each other. Ridiculous. But of course, it's cost almost 500 lives so far, with many more still to come, no doubt.
Just briefly, Mark, how is the ceasefire? Pretty fragile.
It's very shaky indeed. Throughout the day yesterday, we got persistent reports of gunfire, artillery fire, or other explosions being heard in Khartoum and Khartoum's twin city as well. This morning, we're told that overall the ceasefire still appears to be holding, but it's so volatile. Even without out-and-out warfare there, it's very difficult and perilous for anyone to make that journey, because there are these checkpoints. Sometimes they're manned by these kind of militias, boy soldiers, a lot of them drunk. I mean, it's just...
And trigger happy.
Yeah, and absolutely trigger happy. And not necessarily given direct or clear orders from above. It's a very difficult situation. People have to weigh up what they want to do, take the risk, because there's no military escort to that airport in the north of Khartoum, or hunker down, or try and get out east towards the port of Sudan. Lots of potential options, none of them necessarily the best option.
Yeah, and of course, as the food, the water, the electricity starts to run out, you get a humanitarian crisis looming.
Yes, there's no doubt. As the fighting continues, we know that a lot of the infrastructure, the utilities and the like have been cut off. Internet is very patchy. It's up for a few hours, it's down again. Electricity supplies are being cut. Food and water, as you say, are running out. So even if you decide you want to hunker down and you think your neighbourhood is relatively safe, are you going to be able to get the provisions if you haven't stocked up in advance to keep you and your family?
OK, thanks, Mark.
Mark White, that's our Home and Security Editor.
Right, Britain's oil and gas producers have been handing over much more of their profits to the government over recent months due to a series of windfall taxes.
And now the industry is dealing with, believe it or not, the most serious walkouts of staff for a generation, with 1,300 workers from the Unite Union spending the last 2 days on strike.
So what impact is this having on the UK's crucial oil and gas producers? Our very own Liam Halligan has been to Aberdeen to find out.
Aberdeen, Scotland, the energy capital of Europe. North Sea oil and gas production has dropped almost 2/3 over the last 20 years, but remains vital to our energy security. Now this pivotal industry is dealing with the most serious strike action in years, and of course, spiralling taxes.
Just over a year ago, British oil and gas producers were paying 40% tax on their profits, already more than other industries. But that's since risen to 65% and now 75%. Could that kill off what's left of this vital part of the British economy?
Most North Sea producers aren't now huge multinationals, but smaller UK firms. A group of such operators recently wrote to Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, warning that extreme and open-ended taxes are posing an existential threat, making investments unviable and leading to a rapid onset of the decline of the North Sea. Mark Lappin, an Aberdeen-based oil industry geologist, says the prospect of much lower North Sea production is very real.
Well, there'll be certain organisations that will have modelled their 20, 30-year plans that now have to, those conclusions are no longer valid. And if the investment is already made towards them, then some companies will certainly be in trouble because of that.
An oil and gas hub for half a century, Aberdeen's at the heart of an industry that generates billions of pounds in tax each year while supporting 200,000 UK jobs. The Port of Aberdeen has invested £400 million building this newly opened quayside for oil rig repair and decommissioning. But these windfall taxes, set to last until 2028, could see the UK lose out to rivals overseas.
We have companies who are looking to actively invest in other parts of the world rather than invest in the UK. We've got supply chain resources like the drilling rigs you see here, which can quite easily go and work in other parts of the world rather than working here in the UK.
Over the last 2 days, dozens of North Sea platforms have faced further disruption, with 1,300 offshore workers on strike. Oil and gas companies are enjoying record windfall profits, says Sharon Graham, boss of the Unite Union. They can easily afford to give our members a decent pay rise. But even at current pay rates, UK oil and gas companies, including Harbour Energy, Britain's largest North Sea operator, are laying off hundreds of staff. Defending his windfall tax, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt told GB News the government spent almost £100 billion helping families with their energy bills, and oil companies should contribute. But we need to keep a dialogue going to unlock more North Sea oil and gas. But the Chancellor's 75% tax on profits means many firms here aren't investing, so less oil and gas will flow. Liam Halligan, GB News in Aberdeen.
Now, still to come this morning, the top economist at the Bank of England tells us all to get used to being poorer and not to ask for more money. Has he got a point? We will get to the point of that. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin,
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:20 a.m. You are with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, the Bank of England top economist, he's called Hugh Pill. he's upset quite a lot of people. He says we've got to get used to being poorer and not expect pay rises.
That's right. He was talking on a podcast in the United States. There was a reluctance to accept, he said, that we are all just worse off. He said that workers had to stop asking for higher wages and businesses need to stop passing costs on to customers. Well, joining us for more is economist Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Good morning, Justin.
Good morning.
Is there any grain of truth to this, what he's saying? And it was just tone deaf. Did he have a slight point?
Well, I think he's probably got a new name now, which is probably poison pill.
Yeah.
It's not often you see the head of the Economics and Bank of England on the front page of the Daily Mail.
Yeah.
That's not his job.
Giving us a bitter pill to swallow.
But, yeah, the answer is two things here. A, we have built up a huge amount of personal debt, and some of that's down to misbehaviour by banks. Our own stupidity, also in terms of what's happened with interest rates. We've all been lulled into a situation where money's cheap, very easy to get hold of, interest rates are permanently at 0.5%. For those of a certain age, which I know doesn't include either of you, who may think back to the 1970s, remember it at 25%, sadly. I'm watching my father with a fixed pension losing a quarter of its value in a year. It's really, really dangerous. So we've got two things. One, helping those people who are in that situation. And B, heaven's sake, educate people coming out of school and university as to what they need to do. I'm all very well known about maths at 18, but actually we need to start saving from the naught. I don't expect babies to go around with cans, but no, family can be contributing. Think about what the typical dysfunctional British family is like. It's actually got assets in different bits, but the younger ones are probably building up debt. And you're going to have to think more about managing that money across the family, not just as individuals stuck with this albatross of £50,000 worth of student debt to start with.
But it is so tenured, isn't it, Justin? This man is on £190,000 salary. That is what is the average wage in this country? 31, 32,000? 6 or 7 times the national average. And he's lecturing us to get used to not having any money.
Yeah. Patronising something or other comes to the phrase here. And it's, you know, that is really... OK, he thought probably was only listening, it was going to be a sort of quiet issue, its own... I'm talking
did it on a podcast in America or something, didn't he?
Exactly.
Nobody's going to hear it here.
Exactly, no. We don't live in that world, do we?
No.
No. That probably just shows, actually, how much in touch with the real world he really is. No, what you need here is someone not telling us you're all going to get poorer. Actually say, this is a bad situation, this is what we've got to do to try and put it right. For you and for the next generation coming through.
And also, where were the economists like him when we were dishing out £500 billion during lockdowns and furlough? If he'd said at that point, you can clamour for this policy, but you are going to be poorer. Yep. That's because that's effectively what he's saying. This is the fact that we've got no money left because of the effects of the pandemic.
Well, we go right way back to the banking crisis, where we suddenly had this one thing called quantitative easing.
Yes.
Now, you'd take an economics book...
printing money, isn't it?
Printing money. You could take an economics book of 30 years ago. It didn't exist. No one knew what quantitative easing did as a word. It was never used. Now, of course, it suddenly became acceptable. And, of course, you're quite right. It's actually printing money. Yeah. You're printing paper money, fiat currencies, not backed by anything, not backed by gold. You can do that for a while, but eventually someone turns around and says, I don't believe you. The emperor's somewhat sartorially challenged, and that's when people stop investing in your government debt. And why is that important to us? Because our government debt keeps most of society going.
But this Bank of England's got form here. Remember Andrew Bailey? We can't forget Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England. Didn't he tell us when interest rates were only 0.5% last year? Pretty much the same thing. Earning £575,000 a year, as I recall.
Yeah, and it's...
This is not what governors and chief economists of the Bank of England should be saying.
And they should be saying, look, these rates are ludicrously low. These are emergency rates brought in for the banking crisis. Yeah. The banking crisis is sort of over. There are still big issues to address, but they should be brought back to reasonable levels to educate people coming through that actually money ain't free. Yeah. And you're going to have to, I'm afraid, take the responsibility for it. What he said here is a ludicrous way of actually putting it across and insulting to people. But realistically, actually, we need to actually tell people, look, this is what you need to be able to do. You can be saved from this by managing it across the family. Because you think about the generations. Grandparents may own a house or something like that. Parents got a lot of outgoings and things. And our inflation is very different. Younger people have lower rates of inflation because they buy electrical goods, which go down in price quite often, whereas those of a certain age take drugs of a different type to try and keep us alive, and they get more expensive. Yeah. So it's planning that in advance, just as though you were running a company. That's how you actually have to think about it. If you're on your own, it's, I'm afraid, really rather difficult. But if there's a problem belong to the great British dysfunctional family, you may not like your relations, but actually financially you're worth having. That's what you can try and do. And but putting this up to people is just frightening the living daylights.
The bank said anything about his interview?
No, well, I haven't seen anything. I'm have to go and have a look at some other podcasts and find out.
Yeah.
They need some responsible commentary to say, no, this is dangerous, this is what we're doing about it, this is what you need to do about it.
And there are some business leaders as well now calling for Jeremy Hunt to implement some tax cuts, quite clearly coming together to say, we need these tax cuts. Is he going to do it?
No, he's not. I mean, but bear in mind, the main way you can actually get this economy moving, the primary driver, of course, is the consumer buying stuff, but also the driver in terms of taxation are smaller companies. We're really good at setting up businesses in this country. Unfortunately, we're really bad at financing them to grow. Where are these companies? They're tech companies, often in those tech hubs all around the country. But we don't finance them properly to grow into bigger ones. We wait till the Americans come and buy them and take them back to Silicon Valley. Do that, you'll create more jobs, more wealth, and in this country. That doesn't cost the government very much.
And we lumber them with higher corporation tax. Justin, I mean, and you hear some people say, oh, it's all about profits for huge corporations. Small companies pay corporation tax.
The biggest driver, the biggest tax earner in this country are the small businesses. They're the ones that are actually making the profits and doing it, and they are the businesses of tomorrow. Classic example when you see that idiot from the CBI representing a group of businesses. Look on the list, they're all the old businesses. You won't find a small tech business run by a spotty individual with a good idea joining the CBI because they've got other more interesting things to do. And, of course, they're focusing actually on how they struggle to get that business going and grow. The large corporates, frankly, are yesterday's businesses. Focus on tomorrow and get the government not to put money into them, give them the tax breaks, enterprise investment schemes, put that regionally, so more money gets invested locally.
Story in one of the papers say that Unipart, it was considering major investment in Britain. It's going to do it in the United States instead because there are better financial incentives. I suspect the corporation tax rise is a factor.
Precisely. I mean, you look at actually what Biden's done. Not that you can necessarily remember what he's done, but the
But you said it.
But, you know, the package they had to actually, a huge package to try and stimulate the economy, which a lot of Americans are saying that's far too much. But the effect of that is exactly what you described. Companies will sit there and say, oh, I'm going to join in on that one. It's a fantastic tax break in America. And so you're putting people off coming here. We've got to make ourselves look really attractive. When you had, again, a Prime Minister, a certain ex-Prime Minister saying, I can't use the words, he's fed up with business, that's where you get the money from. Mr Johnson, who pays your wages? The answer is it's the business and the grafters to actually produce the profits, which you then tax. Overtax it, you kill it.
There's part of me that works out that can't work out what exactly they're doing with the economy in this country at the moment, because it feels like it's an inevitable sort of resetting of the system, and we're going to have these huge corporations, all these pubs, these restaurants are going to be closed. Where are those people going to go and work? I don't know. I have so many questions I don't see an answer for. The only thing I'm sort of keeping my fingers crossed a little bit is that with an election next year, maybe Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak are keeping their powder dry with some lovely measures to reduce the tax, to allow us to have more of our money left at the end of the month to spend in the run-up to the election.
Well, there's one word, we've said it before, that runs an economy, and it comes from the politicians and the rest of us, confidence.
Yes.
If we don't have confidence...
I have none, Justin.
Right, then we don't go out and spend as much. No. We don't invest in something. I sit there and say, am I going to start the business up now? It's a bit risky, I won't bother.
Absolutely.
If I've got politicians saying, look, we're laying out the basis here to actually make sure you can set up a business and you will be rewarded for it in time to come, not now, and at the same time make sure that individuals have the level of protection in terms of finding cheaper or easier ways of being able to manage their finance. Take things like credit unions, those sort of things. Really good ideas which provide cheaper debt for people and help manage their way out of it. And then for the next generation, make sure it's in the schools early, right from the naught, putting money into people's pensions. It may sound rather dull, but it's an asset which takes a long time. How do you get rich? The answer is slowly.
Yeah, OK, Justin, thank you. Well, it feels very slow
Justin,
at the moment.
Stuart.
You've been getting in touch on your views on Sudan this morning, and Melvin has said, I feel for the different nationalities who are working and living in volatile countries, but nobody forced them to work and live abroad. They should have moved home before it became serious, but they expect the forces to go and collect them from all over the area, which would have put our own forces in danger. And
Jeff speaks for many when he says, have people stopped taking responsibility for themselves? A very conversation you and I had yesterday.
Right. Now, the charity, which runs the UK's largest network of food banks, says that there's been a record Almost 3 million emergency food parcels handed out at food banks in the year to March.
The figures come from the Trussell Trust and they represent a 37% increase compared to the previous years. They also show more than 1 million parcels were given to children.
So joining us now is the Director of Policy at the Trussell Trust, Helen Barnard. Good morning, Helen. Nice to talk to you again. Just first of all, how does somebody qualify for a food parcel, for the support? Do they have to justify to one of your food banks why they might need it when they turn up?
Well, everyone who comes to us has been referred by somebody. So what will normally happen is they will have been in touch with an agency of some kind, and they will have...
I think we've lost her.
Oh, that's a shame.
Well, let's carry on reading out some more reviews until we get Helen back, because I think there's going to be quite a reaction to Hugh Pill, but look, still quite a lot on Sudan. Gary says, Sudan is not the United Kingdom. These people are directly employed by the UK. Get them out. All others in Sudan, tough luck. You're there by your own personal choice, so getting out is your personal responsibility. Nobody's criticising the Foreign Office or the Ministry of Defence for what some people say is a slow rate of evacuation.
Jana said, I'm absolutely fed up to the back teeth with this situation. No one can stay or travel to another country without a passport. I think this is about immigration, maybe. Every single one should be carted back, then lessons will be learned, and we all have seen what these young men have done with their identification. That's about the immigration bill. Suella Braverman is going to be probably giving a statement, actually, this morning on the police.
Cheers.
But the bill is back in the House of Commons to be debated also this afternoon. So we've got tons on that in the next hour and a half.
Yeah. So we've still more to come. That's after your morning news, of course.
Andrew, thank you and good morning. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Some breaking news first. The first flight carrying British nationals from Sudan has now arrived in the UK. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says up to 300 people have been brought out of Sudan so far, with more expected to leave today. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours ahead as the military races to rescue people before the 72-hour ceasefire ends. There's been criticism over the UK's response to rescue efforts, which Ms Braverman has defended. Meanwhile, Suella Braverman has accused the European Court of Human Rights of undermining the government after the controversial Rwanda plan was blocked last year. Parliament will vote later on whether to give the UK powers to ignore the Strasbourg Court's rulings. If the government's illegal migration bill is successful, Ms Braverman said they would not put a limit to the number of migrants they could deport to Rwanda. MPs debating on the bill have been warned to bear in mind the UK's human rights commitments. The government has met its target of police recruitment numbers as figures show nearly 21,000 new officers in England and Wales since 2019. Rishi Sunak said the goal was at the heart of his pledge when he took office to cut crime and make communities safer. The recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next 10 years. But Mr Sunak said that although progress is good, more work is needed. Health leaders have warned that patient safety is at risk ahead of the planned nurses' strike this weekend. NHS Confederation said that if there are no plans in place for covering striking staff, then there'll be no guarantee of safe care for patients. The walkout, subject to a legal challenge, marks a significant escalation in the ongoing pay dispute. Strike action will begin at 8 p.m. on Sunday and will last for 48 hours. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2478 and 1.1290 euros. The price of gold is £1,601 and 4 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,871 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Oh, good morning. We're having a chat and we're looking at the papers here. The government says it's going to be putting more bobbies on the beat by reaching its target of recruiting 20,000 new officers in England and Wales. We'll get the view from one police and crime commissioner. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel. We'll carry on reading the papers.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning, it's 10:37. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, the government has finally met its manifesto pledge of hiring 20,000 new police officers. I think they've got up to 21,000 in England and Wales over the last 3 years.
Let's go live now to Home Secretary Suella Braverman.
Thank you, Rory, for that introduction. You know better than most from your own experience on the beat the realities that our brave officers face when going up against violent thugs and other criminals, and the damage that crime can do to people and communities. And that's why it's wonderful to be here welcoming the launch of the Public Safety Foundation, an organisation committed to making the UK the safest place to live, work and raise a family. This really is the perfect forum for setting out my ethos for common sense policing. Everything that our police officers do should be about fighting crime, catching criminals, and keeping the public safe. My mantra at the Home Office is simple: common sense policing. Common sense policing means more police on our streets. It means better police culture and higher standards. It means giving the public confidence that the police are unequivocally on their side, not pandering to politically correct preoccupations. It means measuring the police on outputs such as public response times, crimes solved and criminals captured. It means police officers freed up to spend their time on proper police work. It means police prioritising the highest harm crimes and those that matter most to the public. It means the police making use of powers like stop and search that have proven effective in taking weapons off our streets. And above all else, common sense policing means officers maintaining a relentless focus on fighting crime, catching criminals, and keeping the public safe. And I'm going to speak on each of those items today. Firstly, the public wants to see more bobbies on the beat, and so do I. It is central to common sense policing. Everyone who has been part of the government's Police Uplift programme should be immensely proud of what we've achieved in the last few years. Many said we couldn't do it, but this is a police success, a Home Office success, and a Conservative government success. We've delivered an additional 20,951 officers into policing over the past 3 years. There are now almost 150,000 police officers across England and Wales, the highest number ever. 24 forces now have more police officers than they ever had before the programme. I'm extremely grateful to police chiefs for leading this drive. And to those men and women...
Well, that's the Home Secretary. She's feeling very pleased with herself because they have hit the target of 20,000 police officers. We have to put it in context, though, don't we? The reason they had to get 20,000 police officers after 2019 elections is because Mrs May, Theresa May, remember her, when she was Home Secretary, got rid of 20,000 police officers. A Tory government getting rid of 20,000 police officers, astonishing. She went to the Police Federation and said, "You're crying wolf, you don't need all these extra police officers." We do. The trouble is, of course, a lot of these... so we'd have lost very experienced police officers too.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk now to the Police and Crime Commissioner for Surrey, Lisa Townsend. Lisa Townsend, the Tories can't get too excited about this because they're only putting back what they did wrong, in my view, some years ago.
And Andrew, you know, normally I would completely agree with everything you say. However, in this, we have every right to be excited, as do Surrey's residents. We're one of the 24 forces that has more police officers than ever before. And the important point here is that it's 20,000, or as you said yourself earlier, almost 21,000 extra officers. And that is why, as a country, we've got over 3,500 more officers than England and Wales has ever seen. So this is brilliant news. But also, as the Home Secretary said, it's not just having those extra officers, it's what we do with them. And making sure that, you know, we are tough on crime, we're tough on criminals, and that we're really bringing the fight to criminals on our streets and making sure that those police officers get out there as soon as possible so that our residents right across the country...
Oh, we're having some technical issues this morning, aren't we?
The question I was going to ask, Lisa, was how many police officers are we, of those extra police, are we going to see on the beat? Call me old-fashioned.
I know, I think, I couldn't agree more. We want them on the beat. But you know what? And I know this is old-fashioned, but I want a police station. I want a police station. And I want people to pick up the phone. Don't mean 999. I think our 999 service, emergency service, is very good. But I think, is it 111 that you ring for non-emergency?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Here we go. I think
We've got Lisa Townsend back. Lisa, are you with us? We've got you back. We think we have.
Hi.
We have. Lisa, we're asking you how many of these police officers, extra, will we see on the beat in the community?
Well, it'll be up mostly to chief constables working with their police and crime commissioners to make sure that residents can see as many police officers as possible. And that's a really important part of it. But we've also got to remember, with fraud being one of the highest crimes, and certainly in Surrey, 42% of all crime in Surrey is fraud and mostly takes place online. When you add that to, unfortunately, the rising cases of online paedophilia and child abuse, we've got to make sure that we've got police officers in the right place. Now, more often than not, that will be on the streets. And I want to see as many police officers out in our communities as possible. But we do need to make sure that our police officers are also comfortable on that digital beat. And I'm afraid that will mean one of the things that people don't always like hearing. That will be police officers behind their computers, because that's where so many of our criminals are as well. So let's get the balance right, and let's make sure that we're policing properly and we're tackling crime wherever it is, whether that's on the street or elsewhere.
OK, thank you very much, Lisa. Lisa Townsend there, Police and Crime Commissioner for Surrey.
We're going to have the papers there coming in to join us shortly.
We've been trying to get our food bank lady back.
We do want to talk to her because we want to press her on the criteria for food banks, how there's so many people now, why so many children are using food banks. I'm also curious to know what food they get given.
Not the healthiest food in the world, I think, it's fair to say. And also, you know, what sort of... I did ask, I think we spoke to the same lady last week, and I said, you know, do you think some people now are just budgeting in a way that they just rely on this? This is their weekly shop. This is their food shop. And if it goes, then what on earth do they do? Let me know your thoughts at home at gbviews@gbnews.uk. And we've also got... You've been getting in touch with us this morning about Sudan. And there's quite a lot of messages from people saying that actually...
sort it out yourself, basically.
Gary said Sudan is not the United Kingdom. Those people who directly are employed by the UK, get them out. All others in Sudan, tough luck. You're there by your own personal choice, so getting out is also your personal responsibility. And Jenny says these people are native Sudanese who come to Britain, got British citizenship and passports, and then returned to live in Sudan. That includes also the so-called NHS doctors in Sudan who worked briefly in the NHS but chose to go and live and work in Sudan. They were safe in the knowledge that having a British passport, they could run back to Britain anytime there's a problem in their native country.
Well, there we are. Now we're going to talk about what's in the papers today, because they're pretty busy. We've got in the studio with us Joanna Williams, of course, author and academic, and Mike Parry, political commentator. Morning to you both.
Good morning indeed. Great to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. Where are we starting?
Well, I'd like to know your thoughts, first of all, on these, maybe some of these comments about Sudan. Should we get people out?
I sympathise with a lot of those comments. The first thing I was going to say to you was you can't depend on the government to sort out everything that's a problem in your life. The second thing I was going to say was that since 1956, when Sudan took independence off the Egyptian UK government, who jointly ruled it, there have been over 20 armed coups. Not changes of government, but armed coups, people shooting each other to take power. Now, if that's not a dangerous country to go and live in, you should have been warned a little bit when, you know, the tension started rising 3 or 4 weeks ago. Might be a good idea to get out now.
I know, but we rely on the government, and then there's criticism the government hasn't done it quickly enough. And yet the Foreign Office advice until a few days ago was don't leave your home.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing is, don't they realise how privileged you are? We've got an air base in Cyprus. So of all the countries there that have got to try and get their people out, we're doing the very best and most efficient thing to do, and that's get them out and get them somewhere safe within the same vicinity. But honestly, I got stranded in Libya once, right, when America was bombing it, and Libya basically closed down. And I'm afraid that it was everybody for yourself. You know, it wasn't the government's fault. The Daily Express had sent me there to cover the story, but we were all in mortal danger because there were armed gangs running around. But I'm afraid in that situation, why did you go there? I'm afraid you're going to have to help yourself to get out.
Yeah. What do you think, Joanna?
Well, I do agree that this is unsurprising. I mean, Sudan has been racked by civil war and conflict for the best part of 2 decades now. And, you know, nobody should be shocked that this situation has arisen. And anybody who claims to be is disingenuous and has their head buried in the sand, quite frankly. But I do think there are issues, you know, just about basic competence of the British state. I mean, we all remember those harrowing pictures from the evacuation of Kabul, and it would be horrific to see something like that. And I do think as a basic test of, you know, how good and effective we are at being able to operate on the world stage and actually do quite basic things, really, like getting citizens out of a country, safeguarding people's welfare. Yeah, I think this is an important test. And I do actually think that once again we've been found wanting.
There is an echo, isn't there, of Kabul, because the British ambassador is on holiday.
That's right. He was in this country. He's actually here.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that when he came back, he'd have thought, I better keep in touch with what's going on in Sudan because I know more about it than anybody else.
Anyone else.
So I have an obligation to warn the Foreign Office it's getting rather dodgy. That is huge incompetence in my view. But once again, we didn't send anybody to Sudan. They went of their own volition. They went there either to see family and friends or they went there because, as we all know, in Africa, there's great opportunities to make money because it's expanding economies all over the place. So people are pioneers. They take the risk. They go to Sudan. I've got a great business idea. Then I'm sorry, you've got to be responsible for yourself.
And they did get the diplomats out because we know from who did we talk to yesterday? The chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee.
Alicia Cairns.
That they had targets on their back. And they got them all out.
No, they're all in the same place as well. See what I mean? While other people are hiding in houses, they're all in the same place. Get them to the airport, whoosh.
But it does beg the question, I mean, why bother having a Foreign and Commonwealth Office? Why bother having this network of embassies all around the globe if they're not able to actually do the most basic tasks that you would expect them
but once
to carry
again,
out?
you know what I'm saying? You've got to stand on your own 2 feet in life occasionally, and I don't think politicians are the smartest people in the world anyway. I think I'm smarter than a lot of politicians, and if I was in Khartoum and I could have seen it all happening, I'd have jumped into a car and driven to the Egyptian border, not wait for a government, sort of civil servant, longevity, 30 years in the job man to suddenly wake up one morning and think, there's something going on. I can hear these bangs and explosions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It is an unstable place.
It's very unstable. OK, right. Moving on to Hugh Pill. This is the chief economist at the Bank of England, Joanna, saying we just got to get used to being poor.
I have said this has made me so angry.
Sure it has.
so angry. I mean, there's all levels of hypocrisy and thing that's just enraged me about this story. I mean, how dare he, for one thing, when he's on such a huge salary himself. I mean, if he perhaps wants to lead the way and give up 2/3 of his salaries and to bring him down at least more in line with what kind of average people are earning, then fair enough, he's welcome to do that. But I mean, more to the point, we didn't ask for the Bank of England to print money seemingly endlessly over the past few years as we had this quantitative easing to get us through the lockdown, which, again, most people didn't actually ask for in this country. So they locked down the economy. They then printed money to compensate. We're now paying the price with very high levels of inflation, and we are now being asked to take a pay cut for it. That beggars belief.
And the chief economist, shouldn't he have been one of those who was aware that perhaps interest rates should have gone up just a little bit quicker, which would have cut inflation, our inflation would not be then so high?
The track record of the Bank of England of controlling inflation, it's absolutely scandalous. But I'm going to say something to shock you all now. I've got a lot of sympathy for what Hugh Pill said. He worded it badly. If he'd have said, living standards are going to fall for all of us, and we have to come to recognise that, then everybody would have said, look, it's not our fault the price of gas has gone up. That's the fault of Ukraine. It's not our fault food from Europe's gone up. That's because there's a drought in Spain, OK? So what he's saying is, but he said it a bit clumsily, but I have got sympathy and empathy with him, is you've got to cut your cloth a little bit more carefully in the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, for instance, people are going to laugh at me. Where I would previously have bought a case of Chateauneuf du Pape or something, from my wine merchant, I now buy Beaujolais. Now, people are going to say, what a ridiculous comparison. But what I'm trying to say is, at every level, you've got to say to yourself, I'm going to have to economise, I'm going to have to reduce my expectations, and it's relative. It's relative between people on 20 or 30,000 a year and, the guys on 100,000.
There's a limit to how much people can cut their cloth, and it's very patronising, I think, to say to some people who are... We see in one of the stories we're going to talk about this morning, high levels of people using food banks. To turn around and say to people, well, you just have to cut your cloth a bit further. That becomes impossible beyond a certain point. My mother, for example, doesn't put her heating on. How can I tell her to put her heating on even
very sympathetic
less,
for her,
but she never puts it on at all already?
But that's Mr. Putin's problem.
No,
and what I'm saying
not,
is that we've got to... Look, a lot of our economic woes at the moment are nothing to do with government management. They're to do with world events.
I'm afraid. I disagree,
Well, and I'm not being patronising. I don't like you to accuse me of being patronising. I'm not. I started off as a working-class boy. I've worked for 50 years. And all I'm saying is that Everybody has got to now tailor their expectations, and it's relative through different layers of society. You can't say, well, you know, the rich don't have to cut anything at all, they've got so much money. We all do. We all do. And that filters right the way down.
But he's on 190,000 a year. Last year we had the Governor of the Bank of England saying something very similar.
See, on 360. 570, thank you, yeah.
It does sound tin-eared.
Well, a track and trace app
I think they are tin-eared.
the taxpayer 30 billion quid. And it's been proven to have done nothing. It's gone now, shelved. Where is it? 30 billion quid. The amount we paid on furlough, the amount of fraud from people who took out loans during lockdown and went off back to where they normally live. A lot of the Polish builders, they scammed the system. I'm sorry.
I know, but the whole country was responsible for the chaos that ensued, you know, for 18 months during the pandemic and the lockdown. None of us had ever done it before. None of us really knew what to do. I agreed with the first lockdown because I thought, well, that might stop it. After that, I didn't want any lockdowns. And I'm not trying to be smart in hindsight. So I knew it'd smash the economy, but we must have known it was going to smash the economy.
You know what? We knew we were going to be poorer. And that's what frustrates me about this story. Where were these economists at the time when Matt Hancock and Rishi Sunak were all basically saying, this is wonderful, look how we're looking after you? Why didn't they say then, we're going to look after you now, but brace yourselves, because you're going to be really, really poor for the next few years?
But I agree completely. Anyway. You can see how much money was spent over the past few years, but also decisions that we've taken in this country. For example, even 10 years ago, not to start a new nuclear power station off. Those kind of decisions have made us far more reliant. Exactly. And that's precisely why we are reliant upon overseas oil and gas. Now, it becomes too easy, I think, just to point the finger abroad and say, oh, this is all Putin's fault, this is all Russia's fault. I think we do need to look closer to home. Both, exactly as Bev says, decisions that were taken in the past 2 or 3 years, mistakes that have been made by the Bank of England in terms of interest rates and
it's all hindsight, though, isn't it? We've got to deal with it in the present.
But it's not all hindsight, Mike, because some of us were saying 2 or 3 years ago that lockdown was going to make the economy an absolute mess. And it was obvious that if you keep on printing money endlessly, seemingly endlessly, that the chickens are going to come home to roost. And as always, it's the poorest people who have to pay the price.
They called it quantitative easing.
Yeah, exactly, because nobody knows what that is.
Nobody knows what it means, but we know what it means. It meant printing for
exactly.
I mean, don't get me wrong, there were some people who really, really needed that money. Don't get me wrong, there were some people who needed that furlough to keep their businesses going. There are some people who redid the garden patio with it. There are some people who saved it up and then went on holiday. So I just think, you know what, guess what? It was always going to happen.
We're going to have more on the evacuations coming up, and we're going to hear more from Mike and Joanna also in the programme. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us 4, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
So 2 flights with 300 British nationals have made it out of Sudan, but still thousands are stranded. One who made her own way out told us in the last hour that she felt abandoned by the government.
And lots of our viewers say it's not the government's job anyway. Now, the Bank of England, the governor of the... not the governor, he's the chief economist of the Bank of England, says we've just got to get used to being poorer and not ask for more cash. How much do you think he's earning? We'll tell you in a bit.
And more Barbies on the beat, but will it make a difference for you? The Home Secretary has confirmed the government hit its police numbers target.
And Toy Story, the first Barbie doll with Down syndrome is in the shops. A campaigner tells how child's play can actually change attitudes.
You've been getting in touch as well this morning. Lots of emails about food banks, lots of emails about getting people out of Sudan. We're going to get to those in just a moment. Keep them coming, GBviews at gbnews.uk. But first of all, here is your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you. It's 1 minute past 11. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The first flight carrying British nationals from Sudan has left Cyprus and is due to land in the UK this afternoon. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says up to 300 people have been evacuated from Sudan. It's estimated around 4,000 Britons were stuck in the country. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours ahead as the military races to rescue people before the ceasefire ends. There's been criticism over the UK's response to rescue efforts, which former British Army Colonel Hamish de Britton-Gordon told us is harsh.
Now, whether the diplomats got out too early, I'm sure in the review that will happen after this, we can look at that. But at the moment, I think the military are doing a fantastic job in challenging areas. And because there's so many to get out, it's sort of slightly easier for the Germans or the French, who just have a few. They can nip in with their special forces and get them out. For us, we need a more deliberate operation, because if all 4,000 British passport holders want to get out, that is a considerable amount of flights in the tens, not the ones and twos.
The Home Secretary has accused the European Court of Human Rights of undermining the government after the controversial Rwanda plan was blocked last year. Parliament will today vote on whether to give the UK powers to ignore the Strasbourg Court's rulings. If the government's illegal migration bill is successful, Ms Braverman said they would not put a limit to the number of migrants they could deport to Rwanda. MPs debating on the bill have been warned to bear in mind the UK's human rights commitments. The government has met its target of police recruitment numbers as figures show nearly 21,000 new officers in England and Wales since 2019. Rishi Sunak said the goal was at the heart of his pledge when he took office to cut crime and make communities safer. The recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next 10 years. Mr Sunak said that although progress is good, more work is needed. The Home Secretary said policing must remain open to the best and bravest, whether or not they have a degree.
The law-abiding public must be able to know that they can trust any officer they see. Those who are not fit to wear the badge must never do so, and where they are exposed, they must face justice and be driven out of the force. I've seen examples of strong leadership transforming police forces up and down the country, so I'm confident that policing can and will step up.
Health leaders have warned that patient safety is at risk ahead of the planned nurses' strike this weekend. NHS Confederation said that if there are no plans in place for covering striking staff, then there will be no guarantee of safe care for patients. The walkout, subject to a legal challenge, marks a significant escalation in the pay dispute. Strike action will begin at 8 p.m. on Sunday and will last for 48 hours. Prince Harry's phone hacking claim against News Group newspapers continues today at the High Court. The Duke of Sussex believes his private information was unlawfully accessed. During day one of his legal battle, Harry made allegations that his brother, Prince William, settled a claim with the same newspaper company in 2020 over hacking claims. Kensington Palace has declined to comment. The hearing's expected to finish tomorrow. The Foreign Secretary has said that China should not be classed as a threat to the UK. James Cleverly argued that its scale and complexity cannot be reduced to one-word descriptions. He added that failing to engage with China would be a sign of weakness and that the UK must engage directly with the country in order to promote stability.
Dealing with China, I can assure you, is not a job for the faint-hearted. They represent a ruthless authoritarian tradition utterly at odds with our own. But we have an obligation to future generations to engage, because otherwise we would be failing in our duty to sustain and shape the international order.
Almost 3 million emergency parcels were handed out at food banks in the last year. That's a record 37% increase compared to the year before. Figures from the Trussell Trust charity show the number is more than double the amount distributed in the same period 5 years ago. The number of parcels provided for children has also reached 1 million for the very first time. The charity warns that demand for parcels is higher than the number of donations being received. And the coronation countdown has begun with just 10 days to go. Final preparations are underway ahead of the big day. Westminster Abbey is now shut to visitors and a replica of the coronation stage has been built in the Buckingham Palace ballroom to allow King Charles and the Queen Consort to privately practice. Early morning rehearsals of the military parade have been spotted through the empty streets of London ahead of the big day on May the 6th. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, the first flight bringing evacuees back here to Britain has left Cyprus as UK troops take over the running of a key Sudan airfield. We're stepping up the efforts to get people out of Sudan.
That's right. This 72-hour ceasefire largely holds, we believe. The Prime Minister has pledged many more flights will follow as the government looks to evacuate an estimated 4,000 British passport holders.
We spoke earlier to Britain, who made her own way out of Sudan. Here is what she said. Her name is Rosanna Ahmed.
We escaped independently. The Sudanese communities came together mobilized and organized ourselves to get ourselves to the border and escape, essentially. As a British national of Sudanese origin, I felt I had no choice but to take this route, which I feel in many ways was a blessing in disguise, because the people have really, it is the people that have kept me together. Unfortunately, there was no other means of getting out, and I'm very grateful that I have managed to reach safety. But my heart is very much with the people of Sudan and those that haven't been able to find a way.
Well, that's triggered a big reaction, Bev, hasn't it?
It really has. Elizabeth said a Sudanese woman who works in Dubai and has the good fortune to have a British passport expects an army platoon and an RAF jet to get her out, when for weeks they've been advised for people not to go, and if they are there to leave, the empire is long gone, and so is the Navy as we knew it. Very tiny army now, not much Air Force. Why did you take it all on the chin? £3,000 is a lot less than a channel crossing. Mark White.
Yeah, I mean, there are clearly those who are trapped there who feel that they are not being supported by the British government. They're critical of why the British government took longer than other governments to actually start the evacuation process. Well, the simple fact is that the Foreign Office, from the Prime Minister down, actually, you know, and the Foreign Office were then tasked and ordered not to evacuate people while the fighting is on.
Yeah.
Now, some countries like Germany decided they would try the evacuation while the fighting was on. That worked out for them, but it could easily have gone very wrong.
And imagine the row if a British coach or even plane had been hit by the dissidents, the insurgents.
It's a very difficult situation on the ground. There are no right and wrong answers, but the British government thought the safest way forward was to try to wait for a ceasefire where at least that risk factor was reduced a bit, and then people who don't have, of course, the military escort are able to make their way either to the airfield in the north of Khartoum or out east towards the port of Sudan. We were speaking earlier to the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, on this issue, and she defended the way in which the government had handled this particular evacuation.
Robert Jenrick's been talking about this, and he's been pointing out that Sudanese... Immigration Minister. Sudanese migrants were already among the top nationalities.
I think we can listen to the head secretary, actually. She was talking to GBNews earlier.
We are putting on an evacuation operation right now to support British nationals, British passport holders and their dependents. That's what we're focused on, and that's our duty as a government. Well, it is a very complex situation, very sensitive situation, and it's very fast-moving as well. The Prime Minister has been leading the operation, working with the Foreign Office, working with the Ministry of Defence and the Home Office and other departments to ensure that we've got an operation in place. And what we've seen is an evacuation operation taking place. We've got over 1,000 military personnel out in Sudan. I've sent Border Force officers out to Sudan to help with the processing and checking of passports, and we're ensuring that there's a very strong diplomatic effort from the Foreign Office, who will be contacting directly those British nationals who may be affected.
A lot of people, though, who contacted this programme, Mark, are saying, hang on, they chose to be there. It's been unstable for a long time. It's a fundamentally unstable country. Mike Parry's pointed out there's been 20 coups, military coups, since the 1950s. Why is the British government paying vast amounts of money to get them back?
Yeah, well, there is an expectation as a British citizen that you should be, you know, rescued by your government should you get into difficulty in all circumstances. The hard fact is that, you know, in some cases, that's just not possible. And sometimes, you know, if you do head out to a volatile region at a time where, you know, it is getting increasingly volatile, then you've decided clearly to take that particular risk yourself, you land in trouble, then, you know, it might not be the government's fault that they can't get to you in very difficult circumstances that we're seeing unfolding on the ground in Khartoum and other areas of Sudan at the moment.
Yeah, as I was just saying before, Robert Jenrick, Immigration Minister, has pointed out that Sudan is already in the top 10 countries for those people trying to reach here via the small boats. And he said he thinks very significant numbers, was the quote, would flee Sudan in the coming days and weeks and put more pressure on the channel crossings, Mark.
There's absolutely no doubt about that. We do have a proportion of those who come across in small boats who come from Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea and alike. And
via which countries in Europe?
Well, indeed, they will go across the Med, land in Italy or Greece. But instead of staying there, they work their way up because, for whatever reason, they want to get many of them to northwestern France with a view to coming across the English Channel,
the land of milk and
to the UK. So there is no doubt that, not now, but in the next 2, 3, 4 months, those people will have worked their way up to, some of them, northwest.
1,700 Sudanese migrants made the crossing last year and 144 already this year. That's to put it in some sort of perspective, which, in relative terms, they're fairly small numbers. The Eritreans, I think, are more than that, and of course it borders Eritrea, but it will be more. That's going to increase.
Well, there's no doubt about it. Any time that you have instability in a region, then the representation of those on the small boats increases. Although, interestingly, at the moment, the second largest nation represented on the small boats is India. There's no fighting in India at the moment. And, you know, there is no doubt that the vast majority of those coming from India will be economic migrants.
India, which is developing its own space programme.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet they're pouring here in increasing numbers. We must talk to you about police numbers, Mark. A busy day for the Home Secretary. She's trumpeting the fact, nearly 21,000 extra police officers. Hurrah! The Tory government got rid of 20,000 police officers under Theresa May.
Yeah, indeed. They've got to a point where they say, though, that the numbers of police is slightly above where they were before they cut 20,000. And, of course, the net result of cutting 20,000 officers is that you have lost very experienced police officers from the ranks. And that's the difficulty. They've now recruited those additional 20,000, but many others, of course, because you've got that sort of natural wastage that you would have in any employment anywhere, where people retire or decide to leave. So there's a lot of inexperienced police officers now out there on that, on the front lines of policing, who don't have that same support that they would have had a few years ago from lots of experienced police officers who had their back, who were able to guide them through what they should do when they encounter difficult circumstances.
And Mark, we have to be anxious, a little bit anxious. Have they cut corners in recruitment to get that total up? Because they'd set that target. We've seen the problems with policing already.
Well, they say they haven't, but there is no doubt there has been a fast-track process for police forces trying to incentivise people to come to join and to get those recruitment numbers up to meet the government's targets. So it has to be hoped that the vetting is all that it should be, because we know that in the past, there are certain people that have made it into the police service who should never have been there in the first place. You know, we won't know until, several years down the road whether this starts to bite them again, but hopefully not.
Let's hope they've not taken any chances.
OK, thank you, Mark. John says it's good to see more police. However, I feel they are let down by the judiciary. Those lads and lasses do their utmost to catch the criminals, only for the magistrates or judge to let them walk away and stick two fingers up at the police. That is even with a cast iron case.
And are we going to see them on the beat, says this old long-playing record here?
Yeah,
you want to see them on the beat?
Well, this is, of course, a decision for individual chief constables, but I think there's no doubt that, old-fashioned neighbourhood policing has very positive effects. It's not just the fact that it's visible to members of the public who feel that bit safer, but it also gives them that valuable intelligence on the ground. They know, who's just out of jail, who's back in the neighbourhood, who's robbing these houses and shoplifting from these shops. When you're in mobile patrols answering just urgent calls all the time, you lose that ability to have that connection with the community, which is a very sort of preventative strategy at the end of the day. And as I say, it makes people feel that bit safer knowing that they can see these foot patrols in their area.
Thank you, Mark. Right, still to come, are hikes in windfall tax damaging Britain's oil and gas producers? We've got a very special report up next. You're with GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11:21. You're with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner on GB News. This is To The Point.
Now, Britain's oil and gas producers have been handing over much more of their profits to the government, but due to a series of windfall taxes.
And now the industry is dealing with the most serious walkouts for a generation, with 1,300 oil and gas workers from the Unite Union spending the last 2 days on strike.
So what's the impact will this have on our crucial gas and oil producers? Liam Halligan, our very own, has been to Aberdeen to find out.
Aberdeen, Scotland, the energy capital of Europe. North Sea oil and gas production has dropped almost 2/3 over the last 20 years, but remains vital to our energy security. Now this pivotal industry is dealing with the most serious strike action in years, and of course, spiralling taxes.
Just over a year ago, British oil and gas producers were paying 40% tax on their profits, already more than other industries. But that's since risen to 65% and now 75%. Could that kill off what's left of this vital part of the British economy?
Most North Sea producers aren't now huge multinationals, but smaller UK firms. A group of such operators recently wrote to Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, warning that extreme and open-ended taxes are posing an existential threat, making investments unviable and leading to a rapid onset of the decline of the North Sea. Mark Lappin, an Aberdeen-based oil industry geologist, says the prospect of much lower North Sea production is very real.
Well, there'll be certain organisations that will have modelled their 20, 30-year plans that now have to, those conclusions are no longer valid. And if the investment is already made towards them, then some companies will certainly be in trouble because of that.
An oil and gas hub for half a century, Aberdeen's at the heart of an industry that generates billions of pounds in tax each year while supporting 200,000 UK jobs. The Port of Aberdeen has invested £400 million building this newly opened quayside for oil rig repair and decommissioning. But these windfall taxes, set to last until 2028, could see the UK lose out to rivals overseas.
We have companies who are looking to actively invest in other parts of the world rather than invest in the UK. We've got supply chain resources like the drilling rigs you see here, which can quite easily go and work in other parts of the world rather than working here in the UK.
Over the last 2 days, dozens of North Sea platforms have faced further disruption, with 1,300 offshore workers on strike. Oil and gas companies are enjoying record windfall profits, says Sharon Graham, boss of the Unite Union. They can easily afford to give our members a decent pay rise. But even at current pay rates, UK oil and gas companies, including Harbour Energy, Britain's largest North Sea operator, are laying off hundreds of staff. Defending his windfall tax, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt told GB News the government spent almost £100 billion helping families with their energy bills, and oil companies should contribute. But we need to keep a dialogue going to unlock more North Sea oil and gas. But the Chancellor's 75% tax on profits means many firms here aren't investing, so less oil and gas will flow. Liam Halligan, GB News in Aberdeen.
Liam's with us now in the studio, back from Aberdeen. More strikes to come?
There are going to be more strikes to come. You've got Unite, a trade union that overseas represents lots of offshore workers, talking about a tsunami of strikes to come. And it's built on the perception that North Sea oil and gas companies are making lots and lots of money. Well, they are making some money, but 75% of that money is now going directly to the government, where it was just 40% less than a year ago. And my sense, having spent time in Aberdeen, is that you got a lot of people there who have invested lots of money over many, many years, and because the tax regime keeps changing and changing a lot, they're not investing any more. And so you're going to end up with 75% of nothing rather than 40% of something. And that is the danger.
Aberdeen used to be the economic powerhouse of Scotland.
It's the third biggest city. It is the oil and gas capital of Europe. I mean, there are folk doing stuff in the oil and gas industry in Aberdeen that is literally world leading. We're only producing, less than 1 million barrels of oil a day now. At the peak, North Sea Oil was producing 3 million barrels a day. So we are now a net energy importer. But those oil barrels that we produce every day, they're crucial to our energy security. And there's now a move by Hamza Youssef, the Scottish First Minister, whereas previously the SNP lionised the British oil and gas industry.
Well, they said it was Scottish.
Scotland's oil, this is the basis for our prosperity and our independence. A lot of oil industry operatives feel that the SNP is giving the industry the cold shoulder now because Hamza Youssef wants to make Aberdeen the net zero capital of the world. Now, I've got another special report coming up on that, a little film like the one I just did, and we'll be releasing that early next week. But there's a lot of scepticism among locals whose families have had good jobs over a couple of generations now in the oil and gas industry.
That's because, of course, the SNP, we shouldn't forget, are enthralled to the Green Party.
Of course, they're in coalition with the Greens.
Coalition together.
That's right, that's right. So it strikes me that this is a major part of our economy. There are jobs in net zero, in producing wind farms, producing hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. It's a big question to me if there are nearly as many jobs as there are in oil and gas. Oil and gas is employing 25,000, 30,000 people in Aberdeen alone, 200,000 people across Scotland and the rest of the UK. The net zero stuff is about massive bits of kit, massive capital projects, and not so much labour. So I'm concerned for people in the oil and gas industry. Yes, they can transition to net zero and the green energy industry. Of course they can, but I'm not sure there'll be nearly as many jobs.
We wanted to talk to you yesterday, Liam. I'm so glad you've come in today because there was this story yesterday about these benefits handouts, these increases. Just to explain a little bit to us what people are going to be receiving.
Well, people can see. I did talk yesterday afternoon after your show about that, and people can see that clip on the GB News website or on GB News Twitter. But basically, it's households on universal benefit and some other benefits. I've listed the benefits. Will be getting 300 odd quid automatically to their bank accounts between now and the 17th of May, and then there'll be another £300 in the autumn and another £300 in the winter. These are one-off additional payments to help with the cost of living crisis. These payments were much bigger last year. They were more like 1,200, 1,500 quid. So they're less than they were, but they're there to help with energy payments, with food bills for the vulnerable. And there are special additions to the additions for some pensioners and also some people on disabilities.
Is it about 8 million people will receive that?
Well,
I think, is it?
8 million odd people are on universal benefit or are on the other benefits which qualify you for these additional payments. If you are eligible, there's nothing that you need to do. This money will appear automatically in your bank account. If you think you might be eligible, the best advice I've got is go to Citizens Advice.
Right.
Because they are a fabulous, what we call third sector organisation, a very, very reputable charity who will look at your case and give you clear, on-your-side advice about whether or not you might be eligible.
You're the numbers man. How much is that going to cost the taxpayer?
It's going to cost...
say it's the government, it's the taxpayer paying for this.
Yeah, we're talking about single-digit billions of pounds, so it's quite a lot of money, but this is something that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt pledged would happen. It's worth saying, Andrew, that the borrowing numbers that were out yesterday weren't nearly as bad as the Office for Budget Responsibility said.
They get it wrong all the time.
They would be. Why? Because they constantly overestimate what the government's going to spend and they constantly underestimate the amount of tax revenue and jobs, frankly, that are entrepreneurial for the most part. Our dynamic British economy is generating.
So if we're not borrowing as much, why can't we cut taxes now?
That is the pressure that Jeremy Hunt's under. You might have seen the front page of the FT yesterday where they said, you know, Jeremy Hunt says tax is too high. That was in response to questioning from me. I was pressing him in a huddle of journalists on why aren't you cutting taxes? And he knows he's under pressure from the 1922
Is he waiting to put it in an electioneering period?
That's exactly what he's doing. He's saying we can get the tax burden down, tax as a share of GDP by growing GDP. All right, if you want to grow GDP, why are you raising corporation tax from 19 to 25%? I heard a lot about that in Aberdeen, let me tell you. And not just from the oil and gas industry. But I think in the main, you're right, Bev, they are waiting for the tax cut to come just before the general election, which will probably be next autumn. But between now and the local elections in early May, they're trying to change the narrative, saying that the UK economy is recovering, don't squander it, don't let Labour ruin it, things are getting better. Business surveys, consumer sentiment surveys, they are inching forward, they are improving, but we've still got a cost of living
more
problem.
people are being taken into tax this month because of the freezing of the thresholds.
That's right.
More people.
Right, thanks,
more
Liam. Brilliant as always. OK, up next, the first Barbie doll representing a young woman with Down syndrome. It's in the shops. A campaigner tells us how child's play can influence attitudes. That's all after your morning's news.
Bev, thank you and good morning. It's 11:31. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The first flight carrying British nationals from Sudan has left Cyprus and is due to arrive in the UK this afternoon. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says up to 300 people have been evacuated from Sudan. It's estimated around 4,000 Britons were stuck in the country. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours ahead as the military races to rescue people before the ceasefire ends. There's been criticism over the UK's response to rescue efforts, which Ms Braverman has defended. Meanwhile, Ms Braverman has accused the European Court of Human Rights of undermining the government after the controversial Rwanda plan was blocked last year. Parliament will vote later on whether to give the UK powers to ignore the Strasbourg Court's rulings. If the government's illegal migration bill is successful, Suella Braverman said they would not put a limit to the number of migrants they could deport to Rwanda. MPs debating on the bill have been warned to bear in mind the UK's human rights commitments. The government has met its target of police recruitment numbers as figures show nearly 21,000 new officers in England and Wales since 2019. Rishi Sunak said the goal was at the heart of his pledge when he took office to cut crime and make communities safer. The recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next 10 years. But Mr Sunak said that although progress is good, more work is needed. Health leaders have warned that patient safety is at risk ahead of the planned nurses' strike this weekend. NHS Confederation said that if there are no plans in place for covering striking staff, there'll be no guarantee of safe care for patients. The walkout, subject to a legal challenge, marks a significant escalation in the ongoing pay dispute. Strike action will begin at 8 p.m. on Sunday and will last for 48 hours. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2477 and 1.1294 euros. The price of gold is £1,602 and 95 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,855 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Good morning. Welcome back to The Point on GB News with me, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We've got the biggest stories from today's papers in just a moment. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, a toy story that hopes to change attitudes. Mattel has launched its first ever Barbie doll representing a person with Down syndrome. So joining us now are Margaret and Lauren Hilaire. Lauren is 25 and has Down syndrome. Good morning, both.
Morning.
Good morning, Margaret. How important is it to see Down syndrome represented in children's toys?
Well, it's something that's never been seen before, so I think it's very important. And it's just brilliant to be raising awareness.
Lauren, what does it mean for you that Barbie now has a beautiful, blonde Barbie with Down syndrome that children can buy and play with?
It really means a lot to us, for people with Downs, and I just want to raise awareness of people with Downs so we can all have a chance to capture with the Barbie doll.
The first ever Barbie was 1959. Ken came along 2 years later in 1961. We had the first black Barbie in 1968. Some might say, Margaret, this should have happened sooner.
Yes, I think it really should have. I think what we'll be pushing now is for the first male Downs, well, Ken. I didn't say Barbie, but yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And Margaret, just we've got two very high-profile models with Down syndrome now, of course, who are running some big campaigns. It must be heartening for you, as the mother of a daughter with Downs, to see individuals with this condition being in the mainstream and representing brands.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's not just the models, but actresses, actors, really sort of starting to get a chance now. I mean, I saw an advert with Ellie Goldstein, represented by Zebedee, who Lauren's represented by a couple of years ago. And I thought, well, if Ellie can do it, why not Lauren? And she's had some fantastic jobs. You know, it's been really going well.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, we're happy to cover this morning. And congratulations to Barbie for doing this and the Down Syndrome Association in collaboration. So, Lauren and Margaret, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Now we're going to carry on talking. We've got Mike Parry back. Joanna's back. Mike, do you want to talk about Biden, or do you want to talk about tax?
Well, taxes are my bugbear. And do you know what? I found a little snippet in your paper, the Daily Mail, this morning.
Fine paper.
BG Maurice Gibb yesterday appealed for the band's fans to vote Tory in the next election. When asked why they no longer lived in the UK, he said, because we're taxed at 93%. That was in 1979.
Yeah.
And the maximum of that is that if anybody in this country can find a better deal somewhere else in another country where they're not hammered by tax, they will go there. So high taxes mean a drain on energy, they mean a drain on talent, and they mean a drain on investment.
And we've just talked to Liam Halligan about all the taxes on the North Sea oil industry. And, of course, this is April, so people's tax codes are changing.
Absolutely.
He didn't raise the tax threshold, so more people are being dragged into tax this month.
That's right. Another great campaign by your paper, the tourist tax. Get rid of the tourist tax, for goodness sake. Hunt is trying to say, well, it only raises $2 billion a year or something like that. No, what I would say is this. That's only if they're buying a handbag. But they come to London to shop at Harrods, to use the restaurants,
hotels, cafes,
and maybe to buy an apartment here because they want to make regular visits. I mean, it's a massive source of revenue for London, overseas investment, whichever way you put it.
Right, we've talked quite a lot about finance this morning. Let's move on, Joanna. Let's talk about the fact that US President Joe Biden has announced his bid for re-election in 2024.
Oh, do we have to?
Yes, we do, Joanna.
So depressing. I mean, this has got to be the most depressing.
Do you think it should be banned at an age? Do you think we should have, or just maybe make them have a cognitive test?
Well, I was going to say a ban's perhaps a bit harsh because, I mean, as everybody who has an elderly parent knows, 80 years is a very different experience for different people, isn't it? And some 80-year-olds are still very sprightly, completely in charge of got all their faculties. Biden, you know, I'd say that with less confidence.
I know.
He comes across as quite a frail man, elderly man who doesn't always seem to know what he's talking about. And the prospect of a runoff between him and Trump for the next US presidential election.
Unbelievable. Do you remember the picture recently in which the President of the United States of America fell off his bike?
Yeah.
He was in Delaware, right, cycling around. He fell off his bike. Now, if he falls off his bike and bangs his head, that means that Kamala Harris...
Which is really worrying.
Yeah, exactly. exactly will take over as the president of the world's most powerful ever country, and she simply is not up to high office under any circumstances.
We can be politically incorrect on this station because we know why she was chosen to be his running mate, because she's a woman and she's a woman of colour.
I don't think that's even a question of being politically correct or not politically correct.
It's a fact.
I mean, Biden actually came out and said that himself. Yeah. He said his vice president was going to be a woman, and then he said he chose between 4 women of colour. If I was Kamala Harris, I would have refused the job at that point. I would have said, no, this is incredibly insulting. Either you want me because I'm the best person to fill this role, or you don't want me at all. Yeah. But Biden made it clear that she was a diversity hire, which is just embarrassing.
And we never see her. She's never allowed out.
No.
But you know what?
She's never allowed to speak or represent the United States in any capacity. No. I mean, at least when Hillary Clinton, you know, was a stateswoman there, she was flying around the world and giving the message for America. She's not allowed anywhere, Kamala Harris.
But the question I think we really need to be asking here is who is actually running America? I mean, given the state that Biden often seems to be in, given Kamala Harris's incompetencies, clearly somebody
you read my mind, Joanna Williams,
are making decisions
Who
behind
do you think who's pulling the strings?
Well, presumably there's a civil service, men in grey suits. There's somebody.
Very powerful corporate entities.
But
I think it's Capitol Hill, isn't it?
Be made clear, because it means that when you vote, you're not actually voting in the people who are running the country at all.
Country 330 million.
Yeah,
and that's the best they
can do. That's the best they can do. That's the best 2 they come up with. It's unbelievable, isn't it? You know, just to illustrate how dangerous Biden is. Recently, he gave a speech in a room and he reached out to a woman he thought was in the room, a congresswoman. He thanked her. She'd been dead for 3 months. I mean, you know, these are huge errors. It's all very well to snigger and say, but he gets the name of the country he's in wrong sometimes.
It's ridiculous to think
he gets the name of the politician he's speaking to wrong.
Having his strings
he mixes up the All Blacks with the Black and Tans.
Exactly.
Insulting.
Yeah.
Right, Joanna, yesterday we saw Labour capitalising on the gender politics. We've got to teach boys to respect women in the classroom. Is that where it happens?
I think this is awful because, I mean, forget about boys and girls. Put that to one side for a minute and think about education. What are schools for? I mean, at one point, you'd go to school to learn how to read and write, to do maths. You'd learn a bit of history, algebra, chemistry, whatever, if you were lucky one. Nowadays, schools seem to be about anything other than teaching academic subject knowledge. It all seems to be about changing the way people think, changing people's behaviours and attitudes, teaching children that there are 73 genders, that net zero's the most important thing in the world.
I think it's gone up. It's probably 75 by now.
This is another way of pushing through an indoctrination.
I'm very old-fashioned about this, but I believe it all starts in the home.
Yeah.
When you had what you call the nuclear family, mum and dad and 2 or 3 children, your father would clip you round the ear if you spoke to your mother without respect, and that taught you from a very early age, respect women, OK? So many homes these days are one-parent homes, and I'm not having a go at, you know, what you might call the working class and like that. Millions of middle-class homes are one-parent homes. It's very hard to instil respect in young men who are, you know, unsettled, don't have a father figure in the house, want to impress their mates at school. It's very difficult to get them to treat women properly. And it's like being back in the Stone Age, isn't it? Having to teach men how to respect women.
Yeah. But, right, we need to move on. We barely scratched the surface with you two today. I'm sorry it's been so brief. It's PMQs. We could ask the Prime Minister to wait for us, but I don't think he'd listen to you.
Why not?
We've come to the end of the show. Thank you so much. Mark Longhurst will be next, and we'll be back tomorrow morning at 9:30. See you then.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's